computer. Okay, right. So we're live now recording. Well, we're not live, but we're just recording.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do my intro first for the viewers. I'm Sara Proudfoot Clinch, a filmmaker and holistic therapist with a passion for archaeology. I've always wanted to make a film about sacred land, looking at our ancestors, how they lived, and what we can learn from them now. Then COVID-19 hit us, and along with that came lockdowns, which has seen an increase in mental health sufferers and suicides. So my proposed film, Sacred Land, seeks solutions in sacred landscapes and Mother Nature as our ancestors did. So I've started this podcast series called Sacred Land to invite the viewers to follow me on my journey to find funding for the film and a broadcast commission. Along the way, you, the viewers, can meet the lovely guests and experts in their fields and learn more about sacred landscapes, mental health, and healing. So if you know any commissioning editors out there or someone who might wish to fund this film, please get in touch. You can find links to my website below, and if you enjoy the podcast, please click on the like button and subscribe to my channel. You can find more information about me and my films from my website www.proudfootpodcasts.co.uk, and you can find more information about my guests underneath as well. So my guest today is Philip Carr-Gomm, a former Chief of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, a psychologist, a sophrologist, and author of 25 books. Philip lives in the wide open landscape of the South Downs in Sussex. As you can see from where he's sitting, it's beautiful. He's with his wife, Stephanie. In his teens, he began studying Druidry as a spiritual path with Ross Nichols, the founder of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. Later, he took a degree in psychology from University College London and trained in psychotherapy for adults and in sophrology, a system of mind-body training for deep relaxation and personal development. He's also trained in Montessori education and founded the Lewes Montessori School. In 1988, he was asked to lead the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, a role he only handed over last year in June 2020. Although his spiritual practice is rooted in Druidry, Philip believes we have entered an era in which we can move beyond attachments to labels, drawing instead upon the perennial tradition, being inspired by the wisdom in all spiritual paths and teachings, following the way of the universal mystic. In recent years, he has pursued an interest in spiritual practices by training to be a teacher of yoga nidra and mindfulness meditation, and has created an online school, The Art of Living Well, to offer courses that combine psychology and spiritual understanding. So Philip says something magical happens when the worlds of psychology and spirituality are brought together. Every discipline in psychology helps to reveal the extraordinary nature of the human being. But add the insights of the perennial wisdom training, the ancient knowledge and esoteric teachings passed down through the ages, and we enter an awe-inspiring territory that has the power to transform us. So, Philip, I'd like to welcome you to this Sacred Land podcast. And as you are a very, very busy man, I feel rather blessed that you have taken the time to be with us today.
Well, it's a pleasure. It's lovely to be here, and thank you for that introduction. I don't think I've written 25 books. I mean, maybe I have.
I counted them.
Have you? Oh, good God! I thought it was about 12, but there you go. Uh,
Well, I counted them all, and they had your name on them.
oh right, okay. Some of them I think I co-authored with other people.
Okay, right.
But yeah. Okay,
Okay.
great. Well, lovely
So
to be here. Yeah.
yes, and one of the reasons that I chose you to be part of the proposed documentary and also this series of podcasts is because of your background in Druidry
Mm,
and sophrology.
mm,
So both of which some of the viewers may not know anything about. So
yeah.
if you could first tell us a little bit about what Druidry is about.
O- okay, and then you're going to say, can you tell us a little bit about what sophrology is
Yeah,
about?
exactly,
Yeah, that's
exactly.
right. Well, let me try and do the sort of the two together and try and
Even better. Yeah.
link them with your topic, really, which is about relationship. If you think about relationship, you were talking about how you were interested in the effect on mental health of the pandemic, of people's relationship to the landscape and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Druidry is a spiritual tradition that works to deepen our relationship with the land and with nature. So it's a spiritual path that doesn't make the sole focus of concern your own success in achieving elevated states of consciousness or attaining illumination or achieving salvation. It's about deepening your relationship with nature and your own inner self and all the spirits and of nature and of deity and however you choose to conceive that term and so on. Do you see what I mean? So it's
Mm-hmm.
all about that relationship. So the relationship with the land and the landscape is fundamental in it. So that's what drew me to it, because whilst I've always been interested in the spiritual enterprise of changing consciousness and achieving enlightenment, really, I've also been in love with the world and the beauties of nature, and I've wanted to include them both. And in Druidry, it's just, and all nature spiritualities do that. They say you can do both. You can be in love with the world, and you can try and seek enlightenment as well, rather than the more world rejecting approaches that some traditions take. So that's one thing. And now sophrology is seems to be completely different. It's a mind body system developed by a Colombian neuropsychiatrist 60 years ago that is huge in France. That if we were in France, everybody would know what sophrology is. We'd all have experience of it. But it never got out of the francophonic world. And but I speak French, and also you can train in it in English. And so I and the reason I trained in it was I wanted, about 6 or 7 years ago, I wanted to bring more awareness of the body into the work I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And in individual work and in groups and on retreats and so on. So in the Druid work, we'd be doing rituals outdoors, we'd be going on long walks and pilgrimages and camping and looking up at the stars and all the rest of it. But what specifically were we doing with our bodies? And we I didn't have the answer for that. And sophrology is all about your relationship with your body. And so you might say, well, that's very different, but it's not actually, because it's about the landscape. Because when we talk about landscape, we tend to think about the landscape out there, but actually, this is a part of it too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all connected and flowing. And it just happens that I believe that my consciousness is contained in this little bit of the landscape and not there. But the reality is that it's consciousness is everywhere, and
Yeah.
another big topic of conversation. But so sophrology and Druidry, strangely enough, are actually really related. They're ways of deepening your relationship with the landscape.
Yeah. Okay. So it's very pertinent to, looking to healing within motherland, within Mother Nature, in the landscape for, mental health issues, because that's what I'm proposing, is that people will come out of their concrete buildings, which You know, people live, eat, breathe, work, play. They do everything nowadays, the majority do, in concrete buildings. And I believe that has, that along with social media and looking at screens all the time, has exacerbated our disconnection with Mother Nature.
Yeah.
So I'm proposing that we relook at the simplicity of going back to Mother Nature for the healing. So, with that in mind, how do you see that we can heal and find solace and peace and quiet and help the mind by being in Mother Nature, in Gaia?
Mm.
How does it work?
Let me sort of work to that from a slightly different point of view, which is, and I'm not sure I'll be able to get there, but let's try.
Yeah.
When you started off talking about the problems of mental health have been exacerbated by the pandemic, there's another interesting story going on in mental health, which has received less publicity.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like every story, there are layers and it's complex. Because the other thing that's happening is that some people are finding that the pandemic, or the lockdowns rather, have improved their mental health. And the reason why they're finding that is because the pressure to behave in the very unnatural way that we've been behaving, achieving, going out there, all the demands that are placed upon us, suddenly those demands are taken away.
Yeah.
And the problems are, strangely enough, coming for them as we come out of lockdown. So, I work as a psychotherapist and I work with groups as well. And I first cottoned onto this when two people completely independently responded I do a little thing called Tea with a Druid on a Monday evening. It's a kind of 20-minute live thing on Facebook and YouTube where I chat and then we do a meditation together. And two people chipped in saying that they had got off their antidepressants as a result of the lockdown.
Because the pressure from society and
the pressure was taken off. Suddenly it was like they were left alone, more peaceful, less stress. And so that was interesting. So I wanted to write about it, and I started to try to find more information. And there was very little around. The only thing I could find, this was a long time ago now, the first lockdown period, was that the stats for suicides in Japan were actually going down in lockdown. So I haven't done any more research. I don't know what the stats bear out, and I'm very aware that there have been a lot of negative effects on mental health. So I'm not trying to dismiss that at all. But what I'm saying is the picture is rather interesting because there's this other thing going on.
Yeah, it's a robust picture. But if I was to just share some statistics that I have gathered, more people have experienced mental health issues during COVID-19 than ever recorded before. So there are those in your camp where they have benefited. Also, there are people who have benefited from being forced to go out for an hour every day in Mother Nature when maybe they weren't even given that opportunity when they worked in a city with all these long hours and no lunch breaks, and that being the trend. So I get that, but the statistics also say teenage suicides are on the rise, which I find a very worrying statistic, and that police are being contacted by helplines to attend homes for attempted suicides from children as young as 16 years old, 13 years old, and 11 years old. So that means the child is upstairs in the house on a telephone to a helpline, and that helpline have contacted the police and told them to get round there because the child wants to commit suicide. And the parents are downstairs watching telly, cooking, making a cake, not, whatever, have absolutely, oops, you've frozen for a second, have absolutely no idea that you're back.
Yeah.
Have absolutely no idea.
Great.
So can you imagine that scenario? This is happening more and more,
Sure.
and it's quite shocking, really. So
Mm,
young, and 3/4 of the suicides in the UK are male.
mm,
So the pressure seems to be more on the men, possibly because they don't share as easily as women do when they get together, and they're not as there's too much shame and pride attached to opening up about
yeah.
having, despite all of the openness that there is on social media and documentaries and television. It's interesting,
Mm,
and 1 in 5 people in the UK will have
mm,
suicidal thoughts.
mm,
So that, to me, I found quite shocking,
yeah.
and I wonder if we could discuss a little bit about why has humankind become so sick in the mind, and is it just about the pressures in society on work, on how we view success, achievements, or
Well, you know, the, we all have needs for intimacy, for connection, for, you know, there's some very good studies that suggest that to a great degree, the way we've structured society means that some very basic needs aren't being fulfilled for many
mm,
people, you know, and a sense of connectedness, of connection
mm,
with our fellow human beings, and you know, not online, and but for
yeah,
real, and with the natural world are hugely important. And we've you know, gradually, in many cases, disconnected ourselves. I remember
mm,
our daughter outlaw, as we call her, um, uh, said to Stephanie once, "Oh wow, you cook from real." You cook from real, which means, you know, you're not just slitting open plastic bags and
yeah, yeah,
shoving in things into a microwave.
yeah,
And I'd never heard anybody speak in that way before, and I realized how far we'd come.
yeah. Well, the very fact that we have organic food on sale next door to non-organic food, I mean, our ancestors, and not so long ago, only going back as far as the 1940s and 50s,
Mm.
our grandparents, great grandparents would have been growing their own veg in the back garden, and
All
had
organic, yes.
yeah, and it's not even that it's organic; it's just normal. The fact
Yeah.
that the problem is the chemicals that have been put onto crops now, and the genetically modifying of crops to make them unnatural, that has made things not work with the human body.
Mm.
So the norm is the norm is not good for us.
Well,
And
one interesting thing is, I don't know, you know how so many people are allergic to peanuts now, and
yeah,
there's that you if you know, I remember flying on a plane once and somebody saying, if anybody has a peanut snack, please don't eat it,
yeah,
you know, because somebody. And I remember thinking, well, that's very odd. I hadn't appreciated that. Just if I was 10 rows behind
yeah,
somebody and
yeah,
I opened a thing and ate a little thing,
yeah,
it goes through the
yeah,
system and they can
yeah,
become ill or possibly
yeah.
die.
I know.
And I remember when I got home thinking, this is very peculiar. I mean, I don't remember when I was a kid anybody being allergic to peanuts.
No.
And I Googled it, and hey presto, what's the answer? It's because we've led such sterilized lives
Mm-hmm.
that we're no longer, our natural defenses aren't there anymore. Um, I
Well,
mean, there are a lot of theories why there are more allergies, but that is
I
the
know
most,
that,
that's the most obvious and prevalent one.
and very interesting, that
Yeah,
subject. Maybe
yeah,
not for today, but also very interesting. So,
yeah,
bringing the topic back to sacred land,
yeah,
um, I know. Well, I presume, and I'm sure you will know about Kingly Vale.
yeah.
Okay, so for the viewers, Kingly Vale is an ancient yew tree forest. It's over 3,000 years old. And I believe it's very sacred to a lot of people, but including the Druids.
Mm,
And it's quite an ancient landscape, obviously. And I met and interviewed the son of Henry Williamson, who wrote Tarka the Otter. So his son, Richard Williamson, was the guardian of Kingly Vale for, 35 years. And now that he's retired, he still goes there every day and counts the butterflies. And he was just the most glorious man. And he said that for him to walk through the avenue of sacred, old, ancient, gnarled yew trees was his church, because the ground beneath his feet was connecting him to Mother Earth, and the branches of the trees were connecting him to the heavens and the sky and the universe and the spiritual side. So to him, he said, every day I come to church to work in this beautiful place. And as our ancestors would have viewed, it's considered a sacred place because we believe our ancestors also viewed yew trees and groves like that as sacred places. So one of the things I want to ask you is that Druids do these amazing ceremonies, which our viewers will know nothing, many of our viewers will know nothing about. So if we were in a sacred grove, what would you be doing to, for a ceremony to connect with the elements, the trees, the sky, the earth? What?
Well, I think the first thing to be aware of is that the way, rather than walking into the woods and either seeing physical objects that may improve your health, the way we talk about forest breathing, and as you say, we can look at them aesthetically and all the rest of it. Imagine if you walked into Kingly Vale with this vivid sense that all these beings had consciousness, and that all these each of these trees was a being as distinct as a person might be.
Yep.
Then you can get a sense of how your relationship with it changes. If you're doing that and you're really sensing the spirits of the trees, the spirits of the land, then you're coming into communion. And the idea, the main idea behind, if you like, the Druid impulse, if you like, is to be in conversation. And that's said in the deepest sense, as you might say, in communion with. And when you love somebody very much and you have a conversation with them, you visit somebody you love very much, or you're lucky to be living.
Oops.
You will have exchange at a number of levels. So you might have an exchange of information where you talk and you exchange information, and then something subtler happens where there's some inspiration. They inspire, something they say inspires you. But there's something else going on as well, because you're sort of in their presence. So you're sort of in there, your auras are touching. So there's a sort of energetic thing going on, and then if you happen to love them, if perhaps you're in a relationship with them or something like that, you may actually hold each other close and all the rest of it. So there's a physical relationship going on as well. But all the time, it's essentially this process of relationship, of communicating from one being to another.
Energetically,
physically, perhaps, emotionally, intellectually, and then you'd say spiritually. And when you get that, when you open completely to that sense of connection, something happens. I was reading the other day about the Sufis have this concept which is called Sohbet, which is Sohbet, which means, it's a Turkish and Persian word, which means conversation, but it also means spiritual dialogue and communion. It's a very broad term, but they say that there's prayer, then there's meditation, then there's Sohbet. So that I find very beautiful, and that is reflected in Druidry as well. Is so, we can go into the trees and we can say prayers, and so say, you had somebody you knew who was unwell, you might go to a tree and place your hands on the earth just in front of it, or on the trunk, and ask for healing to be sent to this particular person. Or you might sit under the tree and meditate. So you might pray, you might meditate, or you might go into conversation with the tree. And that's in this way that I'm suggesting, where there's a real sense of
energetic exchange, which can verbalize for you.
Yeah. And sometimes there may be no words, no sense of any intellectual sort of exchange, but just a deep sense of connection and communion with this being who you totally depend on. I mean, if there were no trees on the planet, we wouldn't be here. We'd all die.
No,
our species, the human species, is totally dependent on these elder brethren and sisters of ours.
So I have another question for you about our beautiful Mother Earth, Gaia. We have, as a species, as human beings, we have wreaked a lot of havoc and devastation upon Mother Earth and the environment and the animal kingdom. So I wonder, are places that we believe were sacred, are they still sacred? Or is it, as I believe, is the sacred in everything?
Well, that's what I believe too. I mean, I believe that the sacred is in everything. And, you know, one of the jobs, it can be so overwhelming to see the destruction that we've wreaked on the world. And the story that saves me from despair is the story of the old man who walks onto a beach and sees a young girl throwing starfish into the sea, and the tides come up and has washed a lot of starfish onto the beach, and then it's gone down again, and she's picking up the starfish and throwing them into the sea, and he says, "Why are you doing that?" And she said, "Well, because they can die if they don't go back into the sea." And he looks out at the beach, and there are sort of thousands of starfish all the way down for miles down the beach, and he said, "Well, that can't you can't possibly be making a difference." And she said, "Well, it certainly makes a difference to this one."
Yeah.
And then throws this starfish into the sea. And when I heard that story, this sort of sense of burden, really, and of guilt and shame and despair sort of lifted from me. And I thought, that's the approach to adopt.
Absolutely.
You know, is just do the little that you can. And so in terms of places being sacred, there's a little spot. I'm trying to remember the name of it now. It's the name of a street in London. I've forgotten just for the moment. It's something road, which is a road that you find in London, but it's actually in Wellington in New Zealand. And it's a little residential street. You get to the end of it, and there's the most beautiful little spot called the Waimapihi Reserve. And you go in, it's a little valley, and there's a path, and it's meandering up. And people use it for doing ceremonies, and there are occasionally little sort of crystals hanging from a tree, very pretty. And you go up, and there's a stream and everything. And I was absolutely enchanted by it. And I asked one of the residents, "What's the story there?" And they said, "Well, it used to be a sacred place for the Maoris. Then, you know, the Europeans came, and Wellington grew as a city, and people ended up by throwing their, you know, old washing machines and fridges in the valley, in the valley, and turned it into a tip. But about 10 years ago, we all got together, the residents in the street, and we cleared it out. And they've re-enchanted it, they've reclaimed it, and it's absolutely good. It's sacred. I mean, it always was sacred, even with the fridges lying on it.
Yes.
You know, yeah.
So, and as I said in my podcast with Satish Kumar, for the people who are, you know, in high-rise blocks of flats, who have no opportunity or finances or knowledge on how to get to sacred places or open spaces, I always say that just a flower, one blossom, and concentrating and looking at the depth and beauty in that one natural organic flower on your table is your sacred. That's your way of connecting. And I think that people have lost this ability. You know, what we need more is to connect with our imagination and creativity, and know that we are all artists, not just people that we know who are great at painting or drawing, but our artistry is in everything we do. So cooking a meal and presenting it to your family is a beautiful thing. Doing gardening, growing your own vegetables. All of these things have sort of gone a little bit by the wayside, and I just want us to remember that we can all do those things, and they are all beautiful, and it's a form of artistry.
That's right, and it's very challenging. The huge challenge is how do you get that understanding and that experience and practice to, that 13-year-old girl and the 16-year-old girl who was feeling isolated in her bedroom and wanting to on a suicide line.
Yeah.
That's the big challenge. There isn't I don't think there's an easy solution, because if you say to her, we'll just go out into the park and look at a tree or connect with a tree, she's not going to do it.
No, which is why more and more people, like our good selves and the people that we are connecting with and hopefully sharing this information, will come to teachers, and it will come to the schools, and it will come to the universities, and we will spread the message of our ancestors, the simplicity of how we can achieve, this connection through nature.
That's right. And so I think in the mental health field, what is really interesting and sort of part of the work that I'm involved in is bringing, we've already got ecotherapy and ecopsychology, which understands the need for nature connection, but then weaving that into other psychological approaches as well, so that it can reach more people, and I think that really is a way forward. Psychology has taken quite a long, and psychotherapy has taken quite a long time to get to this place, but it has actually finally arrived. Freud started off by saying, you need to make contact with your subconscious. So you say, okay, and then Jung came along and said, well, there's the collective, and then Adler came along and said, well, there are other people, oh, all right, we'll do group therapy, work out how, and then then the transpersonal psychologist came along and said, well, there is God or deity, oh, all right, we'll make a connection with that. And then finally the eco-psychologist came along and said, well, there is actually all of this as well, in case you hadn't noticed. Yes, all right. But it's finally happened. It's taken a long time. And gradually that's going to come into the broader field of mental health awareness and practice, I think.
So I know your time is precious. And I noticed on your Instagram account today, I don't know if you do it personally, but I love it, is a quote. And I'm going to leave the viewers with this quote, because I also love this gentleman, John Muir, the old Scottish-American naturalist and ecologist and environmentalist, and, but it's a beautiful quote. And it's, everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and give strength to body and soul. And it's a very simple statement, but it's by John Muir, and I think it embodies what we're discussing today. So I would like to thank you for being with us, Philip. Such a treasure and a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Sarah. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to end this now, the recording, and